Hi, I'm Vladimir Miladinovic. I'm coming from Belgrade and I'm working in the field of visual arts, and I'm a commissioned artist here for the exhibition here in the Historical Museum of BiH in Sarajevo. So what we have shown here at this exhibition is a series of ink wash drawings. We have exhibited 38 drawings made handmade in ink wash. Basically, this is a kind of continuation of my previous work. For years, I'm very much involved in, let's say, deep research of different types of archives. Some of them are more accessible to me, some are less. So I started with the archives that were, at the time when I was starting, accessible to me, like the archives of daily newspapers, etc. So I started actually researching different topics and different historical periods that are partially excluded from this public discourse or are problematic, or some stories that are not really present in this idea to create one dominant narrative about a recent and a problematic past that we experienced here during the 90s. My method is practically very simple. So I do a research, I made a selection of archival material, and then I'm using this material to recreate it in a way. So I was thinking at the beginning how to use this material, and I have to say that the very process of reading and researching at the time was very important to me, and this process of reading is very intensive, especially if you're speaking about some sensitive material. So I really wanted to make a work where I would get more involved, where I could show this process of reading somehow visible. So what I'm doing, actually, I'm using this archival material and I'm making drawings out of it. So I'm like kind of repeating this material. I'm practically rewriting and redrawing on top of different types of documents, newspaper pages, posters, etc. My concern was actually how this daily life functioned during this very problematic period between 92 and 95 during the war, how the city functioned and how people functioned during this period. But from the other side, I was never involved in any wartime events. I grew up in this small city in central Serbia. Neither my parents were involved. My dad was never invited to go into fight in Croatia and later in Bosnia. So my own experience with war and with this trauma that we all have is actually transmitted through media. So what I'm trying to do, and the main idea of my work, is to actually try to find the references of my memory. So that's why I decided to go and to try to research through different types of media artifacts. Today, when you take a look at this product, you can say that the cultural production of a dominant ideology in every single state that emerged after the dissolution of Yugoslavia played a huge role and is still playing, especially as you asked about this fluctuation of digital images today on internet, etc., and this massive production of images and massive production of news. I think that this is kind of reverse. This is the opposition, to slow down a little bit this process, and it really takes a lot of time to rewrite every single word, every single sentence. And for me, this is the body of the work. This very process of slowly reading through the material, slowly rewriting it, especially as the drawing as a medium is very often perceived as, a moment where you're having a joy in your studio, you play some music and you make drawings. But if you want to rewrite something, you have to be 100% inside of this material. Otherwise you start to make mistakes. It's not possible to rewrite. So this is the process where, especially having in mind that some of these topics are very sensitive and very hard to read, when you start to rewrite it is even harder. And that was exactly the idea of the work, to somehow get back like research through this archive, through this material that already served its purpose and is now buried in the archive, and to somehow do something with it. When I start to rewrite this material, there is this process of imagination. So you're creating this very own image. And I think that this is also happening with the viewers when they, for example, come to see the exhibition. They saw the drawings first. Many times what happens is that people think that these are prints, but then later on they realize that somebody hand-drawn this. And then this is the moment when the drawing as a medium shows up all the capacity that it has, you know, to somehow interpolate the viewer inside of this idea of showing this sensitive material with this, let's say, beauty of a handmade, beautiful ink wash drawing, and then to like deliver the content on the second level. So, like, you ask what's happening while I'm rewriting this. This is very important because especially here in this area, like, in all the countries we had for years, we were showing the proof itself, you know. It was like pointing finger who did what. And we now are in a position that actually we should try to create some wider space where people could be able to perceive the content and to give it different types of meanings. Or actually to, as Didi Huberman would say, that the proof is for those who don't believe, but us who believe, we will have to imagine.
This is an installation of bronze objects entitled Abandoned Landscape that I made about 20 years ago in response to hearing a broadcast from Martin Bell, the then BBC war correspondent, where he signed off and reflected on the Bosnian War. And it was a broadcast that moved me quite profoundly. And I started to imagine what Sarajevo must have been like under siege. So in a way, in my studio, I was trying to construct a landscape of abandoned objects, as if they'd been left behind as people fled. And I also wanted the objects to take the form of wrecked buildings. So there's holes in them, there's lattices. So that also, I hope, gives an impression that these are perhaps skeletons of objects. Throughout all this work, I never claimed to be a witness. In a way, I'm receiving and responding information, in this case, sort of through Martin Bell. For me, my work goes through a very long gestation process. So there's a lot of reflection. And maybe some of the sting of immediate events goes out in favor of more of a melancholy about what man does to man. So I think that maybe in art, because there is this gap between between the idea, the production, and the viewing, this work took best part of a year to make. Now, for a journalist is seeing something, writing his copy, seeing it published within 24 hours. Otherwise, it's old news. So there's something of the kind of reflective aspect of art, which I think is conducive to trying to find ways of reconciliation and not be so accusative. It was very uncanny coming to Sarajevo, having thought about Sarajevo such a lot. And in a way, I didn't know quite what to expect. I was very, it came as a surprise that the museum was in Sniper's Alley, and that places like the Holiday Inn were opposite, and places where the lovers had been shot wasn't so far away, and things like this. And so I started to get a kind of very, very real sense of a place where history is very much located in the city. And also I noticed the Sarajevo roses on the pavement. I also noticed in the exhibition that the museum had about the siege of Sarajevo the importance of water in the siege. And this piece here is a kind of a response to that, and also to a Bosnian joke I was told while I was here, that a guy is crossing a bridge, and a sniper, he's got his bottles of water, and a sniper shoots his bottles so the water runs out, and the guy clenches his fist and shouts at the sniper, "You bastard, don't shoot the bottles, shoot me." Meaning that, in a way, without water you're dead anyway. And the kind of importance that something as simple as a water bottle becomes in a moment of conflict. And I suppose this chimes with a lot of ideas that I've had in my work about the way that objects take on importance according to time and place and circumstance. And instead of the Sarajevo roses, these bronzes have casts of a magnified fingerprint. So it's as if it's a kind of someone's identity that's embedded within the city.
My name is Elma Hodžić. I work as a curator at History Museum of Bosnia and Herzegovina. History Museum of Bosnia and Herzegovina is one quite unique space. It consists from several stories of recent history of Bosnia and Herzegovina. One of them is definitely the story about the siege. The museum works in very specific situation without support of the official government. So several years ago we decided to actually involve the citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina in order to help us to make this beautiful place alive. That's how all of the objects in our collections became museum objects, and that's how all of the stories that we have are collected. The idea is to actually create a platform within the museum, the platform that will help the citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina to deal with the past and with recent history of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The energy of this space in the last several years is actually very amazing, because there are many young people, young artists that are using the space of the museum as a place of dialogue, as a place that tells us not just about the recent past but also about the future. We have many objects that are actually telling us specific details about different aspects of life under the siege, such as food, everyday life, inventions, cultural life of Sarajevo. And that's actually the story about the usage of the language of art during the siege is very inspiring, I would say, and it can also help us as a model for contemporary society. The story about the cultural life is very inspiring, because there were so many theater shows, exhibitions created all over the city in order to create, as artists usually say, the illusion of normality. Each object in the museum actually has its own story. It would take us hours and hours to reveal some of those stories. This stuff, for instance, is one of my favorite objects. It was donated by one of our citizens last year. One man just approached, he just came to the museum because he saw some of the curators, probably on TV, inviting and encouraging citizens of Bosnia to come and to give us the objects. And he actually came to the museum, gave us this stuff, and it becomes the part of the collection. I think it's very also important to see how he preserved his memory on the wall, how he actually made a small process of restoration of the stuff right after the war. So it's now a museum object, and it's made from a can. 20-something years after the war, still we do not have one official narrative, one official story that would be told, that should be told throughout the museum. So actually we are using the situation in a way to use the language, the potential of art to create many other stories. And I think that these stories could actually be a platform for reconciliations, because they are opening up questions. We do not have just answers. Usually the museums give you answers, but in this, in the terms that we operate, I think that we are giving many questions as well. And I think that these questions could be very useful for us in order to see the other personal stories. Also, arts usually deals with personal. Museums can give you statistics sometimes and can manipulate with numbers and stories, but arts is always about personal stories. So I think that these kind of personal stories could help us in a way to raise empathy, love, to cherish our memories, but also to look forward and to look into the future. I think that a Reconciliations exhibition actually consists from several works of art that have different emotions and different connections with contemporary Bosnian society. Bedtime Stories is actually a shelter, a work made by Adela Jušić and Lana Čmajčanin. This Bedtime Stories is actually quoting one specific situation of people sitting in one shelter, or using one shelter, or rearranging their apartments, recycling their everyday life in order to live, in order to resist. I think that the title of this work of art, although it sounds very naive, it's very provocative as well. The other work that I would like to emphasize is also a work made by Dario Kristić and Sabina Tanović. It's called Cathode Infusion. It's actually, it consists from several videos that were playing during the siege, and it actually helps us to see the connection. It also has a lot of these remembering aspects, I would say, because locals are remembering what they could hear on radio or on TV, but also it's connecting us more with the moment, with the rest of the world, and because these cathode infusions, TV or radio system actually also as arts was used to create an illusion of normality. I would like to emphasize the importance of regional cooperation within this project, because I think that the voices that we've collected from the region and from the world were very important. Personally, I did not find the siege of Sarajevo so influential and so powerful, and I did not thought that there would be many artists that would like to express their own opinion or feelings regarding the siege, but many of them actually, the number says everything. More than 50 applications from all over the world meant a lot, not just for me as a curator of the museum, but also personally as someone who was living in Sarajevo during the siege. And there is also one very important factor. Although there was one winner and many other people that participated in the project, all of them in a way wanted to, although they were not elected or selected, they wanted to participate in the whole process. So I find that very interesting, encouraging for our work in the future.
My name is Adila Jušić and I'm a visual artist, and we are here sitting inside of the sound installation called Bedtime Stories that I did in collaboration with another artist, visual artist from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Lana Čmajčanin. The idea started in 2011 when we were collecting stories and doing interviews about time spent in the basements during the siege of Sarajevo 1992-1995 that we did with friends and people we know of our own generation who were at the time during the siege around 10 to let's say 15, 16 years old. Since we also had the same experience of spending those 4 years of the siege as young teenagers in the basement, we thought it might be interesting to record stories and to collect stories about that period of childhood that many children of Sarajevo kind of shared with us that experience. So we recorded lots of stories, and in the end we selected 6 of them for this installation. We tried to have stories with different emotions, so not only the stories that speak directly about war, but that speak about certain activities that were happening inside of these basement spaces. For the installation, we recreated these kind of sleeping rooms. Basically, most of the socialist buildings before the war and still now, had every apartment had one of those storages in the basement, and during the war, actually, as soon as the war started, people turned those storages into sleeping rooms. Also, we had some common spaces which we shared during those 4 years. So the installation is focusing visually on the architecture of those spaces and imitates the bedrooms by the size and the interior, and the stories speak about different experiences. Sound consists of original voices of people who we interviewed and recorded, and then has an voiceover of a narrator that says the stories in English, and also there is a music specifically created for each story done by one of our friends and colleagues, a musician from Sarajevo. And also the name Bedtime Stories, I think it's important to say that it tries to, in an ironic way, say something about the whole situation, the work, because bedtime stories are usually stories that make you go to sleep, that are nice, right? And these stories are, of course, not that kind of stories, although the space itself gives an impression of something cozy, of a place where you can lie in and listen, and also the music kind of adds to this feeling over some kind of relaxed space. But on the other hand, the reality of what was going on that is presented by the voiceovers is something completely different. Also, the person that gave us a voice for the stories uses this gentle tone to say, of course, the stories which are not to be said in a gentle tone, and then somewhere from a distance, every once in a while, appear the real voices of people who were interviewed, more in a kind of a communication and the real tone. And then they also try to give us an impression of something that happened, that is real and that is not just a bedtime story or some invented story that happened somewhere.
These are traces and remains of the siege of Sarajevo, because the museum itself was at the first front line. And the last phase, the phase that the period we are living in, is this yellow tape that you can also see, which says culture shutdown, and that's in a way representing the situation of national institutions in present-day Bosnia and Herzegovina. The situation of the conditions of the stained glass at this moment is really bad. It means that it's getting worse and worse, and somehow it's also symbolically representing the period that we are living in. The artwork is a work of a prominent Yugoslav artist of the time, Vojislav Dimitrijević. We are predominantly history museum, so we are supposed to deal more with the historical facts and archive material, but in a way, even in the history of the institution, so even at the time of Museum of Revolution, museum was having a very significant art collection, finding a way how to talk about the period, Second World War, socialism, through the language of art. So we have this tradition and legacy even from the previous museum. Nowadays, we see the art as a way of, again, talking about the past, maybe in a different way than it was in the period of socialism, when the art was to confirm and to strengthen even the role of the politics and history. Present day, we don't have the role that art had in a previous period. So we are trying to use art as a constructive way in a dialogue with the past. Particularly that we are dealing very much with the contemporary history or recent history, where historiography and historians haven't done a lot. So artists are those who are replacing basically the historical period, and we are very much using it in this sense, first of all due to the lack of historiographical researches, but secondly also we see the language of art as a much more constructive and more sensitive way in dealing with the past. And all the projects and all the activities that we had in these terms are going into this direction. One of the ways of dealing with the past is the project that we are having with a couple of universities from the UK, University of the Arts London, King's College and London School of Economics. The project called Arts and Reconciliation, which had open call as one part of the project. It perfectly matched the needs of the museum, because in that way we wanted to have a response directly to the exhibition that we have, that's the exhibition Besiege Sarajevo that we have last 14 years at the museum as a permanent collection. So we in fact open call for an artwork as a direct response to the exhibition. The response of the artists was really amazing, in a sense that we had more than 50 applications of different artists, so local ones, artists of different generations, that's also important to mention, artists who have been here during the conflict, the artists who were not born at that time, but also international artists. So it makes really this corpus important and the whole process important. We have among 50 works and artists decided and selected, jury decided on the winning one, which is the artwork and installation at the moment already installed at the exhibition of the Siege, and very nicely contributing to the exhibition. That's artwork Bedtime Stories by Adela Jušić and Lana Čmajčanin, which is, as the idea is, to stay permanently at the collection. Is that we have now a group of artists who are willing to work with the museum and who are willing to continue all this process, because we don't see it as a one-time project and that's over, but something that is continuing and it's a process itself. So the response of the visitors and public is very positive, in the sense that the work itself is established, the permanent exhibition is really nicely matching the exhibition. People are staying and listening the installation, so we notice already that a lot of people are staying longer at the exhibition itself, but also the exhibition that we had as a temporary exhibition. It was inaugurated in June in 2018 here, Reconciliations, had also great response and a lot of praising the way we are approaching the topic of the conflict. I mean, it's opening the possibility of dialogue, and that's the most important thing. And what we have done so far is one part of one or few steps in the process that it's continuing, and that the whole project gave, in fact, the possibility of continuing. And that's what we see as a great impact, or that we can easily follow up on this and continue working with the artists themselves, and also using the art, or continuing using the art in the process of dealing with the past and reconciliation as such. We had Vladimir, who had approached the archive of the museum and found the things that were interesting to him, or he found interesting for his work, and produced something that was almost incredible for us, in a sense of the things that he found relevant, that we maybe haven't seen in that way. And he completely gave another dimension to the archive material, which is a great, I think, contribution of him. Apart from that he's an artist coming from Serbia, and as we talked earlier with him, he sees this process of work also very important while doing research on the archive material and producing the work itself. It was kind of, as he explained, individual catharsis or reflections on the past. The sweater from our collection, from the permanent exhibition Visage Sarajevo, the sweater is pretty new artifact at the museum collection. It belonged to the boy, 8-year-old boy, Nermin Divovic, who was killed by a sniper here in the vicinity. The sweater belonged to 8-year-old boy Nermin Divovic, who was killed by a sniper in the vicinity of the museum. We have recently received that object. It became part of the collection, and it inspired that particular the exhibit or object inspired Paul Caldwell to make his own artwork, producing 7 sweaters of different sizes along the growing up or aging of Nermin, when Nermin was 1 month old until his death. So we see, I mean, the exhibition, the work itself was exhibited at the exhibition, but we see it as also one of the artwork that will very nicely and very powerfully contribute to the exhibition on the siege.